Hello everyone. In this video series we are going to create a simple rock paper scissors game. It's going to be a web application and we are going to use Visual Studio Code to write it. We are going to use HTML, CSS for the game interface and JavaScript for the game's functionality. So, as you may already guess, some knowledge in HTML, CSS and JavaScript will be great, but I will try to explain as I go, so don't worry about it. So, let's see a little bit more about our game. As you can see in this browser, our user will be able to select a weapon, like, let's say for example paper. As soon as the user selects a weapon, computer will choose a weapon as well. Then, our game will print out the result of the fight, and will update the scoreboard. The scoreboard will change the border color depending on who is winning. So, if we are ahead of the computer, the border will be green. But if computer is winning us, it's going to be red. If it's a draw, it's just gonna be gray. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to set up Visual Studio Code, and we are going to start building our game. So see you there. In this video we are going to set up our editor, Visual Studio Code. It's basically an editor created by Microsoft. It's open source, free, and it's also cross-platform. So it can run anywhere from Mac to Linux to Windows, whatever you prefer. I'm going to perform an installation in Windows, and then we're going to go over the basics of the program, like settings, extensions and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and download for Windows. As soon as you hit the download button, the download should start automatically. So as soon as it's finished, click on the installer. And keep pressing next. Select the installation destination. You may like to create the desktop icon here. And wait for the installation to finish. We are not going to need the website anymore, so I'm going to close it. Wait for the download to finish. As soon as it's done, open the application. As soon as you open it, you should see a welcome page. It has a few things like new files, folders and stuff like that. It also includes a manual, tips and tricks, video tutorials and stuff like that. Okay, let's start exploring the Visual Studio Code editor. First of all, we have the sidebar, this left sidebar right here. The first tool in our sidebar is the Explorer, which is basically where we are going to see our project files, from the source code to images and executables, anything. We can also create files from here, folders and stuff like that. Besides Explorer, we have the search tool, which is just a plain search tool. Like, you can search for a specific part of your code, replace it with something else. It's pretty self-explanatory. Besides that, we have source control that we are not going to use in this project, but it's very useful in bigger projects. It's basically integrated with the Git, so you can create a repository, push your project and work with that. Okay, so we also have a debugger, which is very strong for an editor. Remember that this is not an IDE, this is just an editor, and having a so strong debugger is absolutely just like the source control. We are not going to use debugger in this project as it's not needed, but you should definitely give it a try. It's very useful. Finally, we have extensions, which are basically new features for your editor. As you can see, I have already installed two plugins that we're going to use: HTML and CSS support and HTML snippets. Of course, you are going to get a few recommended projects, extensions, sorry, based on what languages are you writing, things like that. You can also search for extensions right here. So suppose that you want a JavaScript extension. As you can see, there are tons of them. Let's install this one, for example. Click the install button and hit reload. As you notice, then you should see that the extension that you just installed is enabled right now. So if we create a new file, and we specify the language that we're writing, HTML in our case, you should see that as soon as we start writing, we are getting suggestions from the Visual Studio Code. It also has autocomplete and intelligence features. So it helps speed up the production of our code very much. Finally, we have the settings right here. So if you click that, you can do a lot of things like change the settings of your editor, change the color theme, and do a lot of things with it. Okay, the settings in Visual Studio Code is a JSON file, as you can see here. There are tons of customization that you can do, but we are not going to do anything for this project specifically. But I definitely suggest that you check them out and play around with them. Suppose that you want to change font size, for example. You can do copy to settings, and here let's do 16. So these are the default settings, and basically anything that you overwrite here, anything that you write here will overwrite this. So if we try, as you can see, wow. Okay, let's get back to 40. That's all that you should know basically. You should definitely explore debugger, source control, and the settings a little bit more on your own. But we are ready to start creating our game right now. So see you in the next video. Now that we are done setting up Visual Studio Code, we are going to start building our application. We'll start by creating the HTML and the CSS document. By creating these files, we are going to basically produce the game interface. So if you open up the project folder right here and open index.html, we are going to see that we are getting a blank website. So HTML basically describes the browser, the content that we have on our application. So let's start by creating our HTML document. Every HTML document should start with this line right here. Everything inside HTML is HTML basically uses tags to describe the content of web pages. So what is a tag? A tag is something like this. Basically everything between those symbols is a tag. So we have an opening and a closing tag. Inside the HTML tag we have a head tag and a body tag. As you can see, the extension that we installed on the previous video helps us by auto-completing our sentences. I also suggest that you indent your code like this so that it's easier to maintain and edit. Inside our head document, we describe the browser basic things about our web page, like the page title, its chart set, and things like that. While inside the body tag, we basically store our content. So if we go back to the browser, you will see that we have a blank web page if we refresh it. Let's try to change this title right here. Let's go inside the head tag and create a title tag. Inside this tag, we are going to write our text. Let's say rock, paper, scissors. And we are going to hit Ctrl S to save it. Now, if we go back to the browser and update, we are going to notice that we have updated the page title. Another thing that you have to do in your HTML documents is define a chart set. A chart set basically is what symbols our HTML document contains. In our case it's UTF-8, so it's meta chart set equals UTF-8, like this. Some tags in HTML don't need a close tag. Meta is one of them. If you go back to the page, you're not going to see any difference, but it helps the browser understand which chart set we are going to use. So let's go to our body tag and create our first content in the web page. Let's start by creating a huge title. And checking it in our page. As you can see, we have the rock, paper, scissors title. So, give a minute to explain here. HTML has 6 header tags. They are H1s, H2, and so on and so on. It goes up to H6. Let's see how they look before I explain. So, the bigger the number is, the smaller the title. So for something like the title of our game, we should use H1. And let's create a sub-heading with an H4, let's say, title. Let's update our web page and see how it looks. Okay. So let's continue by storing our title and subtitle inside the header tag. So by copy pasting it inside here. A header tag doesn't change the actual content of our web page, but it helps the browser understand where is the title, where is the footer, where are the contents, and things like that. So it's a good practice to do that. As you may recall from the first video, the next thing that we're going to create is a scoreboard, basically. We're going to create a scoreboard using an HTML table. To create an HTML table, start by creating a table tag, and then we create our HTML tables in rows and columns. So let's create a row using the tr tag and 2 columns in each row using the td tag, like this. I'm going to create another row. The first row will be and the next row will contain the scores, which will start on 0. Let's see. Okay, as you can see, we have the first row which has 2 columns, player and computer, and the second row which has 2 columns as well, which contains scores 0 and 0. The next thing that we're going to create is the 3 buttons for the user to choose a weapon, basically. So let's create another header tag, an h1, choose a weapon. Then we're going to create a div. So what is a div? A div is basically a container. When we want to store a group of items in HTML, we use a div tag. Inside the div tag, we have 3 images. This will be the rock, paper, and scissors. Give me a minute to load the images. As you can see, I copied the 3 images I have created for this project, which you can find in the project files if you want, but I highly encourage you to create your own images and play with it. So if we check the browser right now, we're not going to see anything, but you can see the full path right here. It's in .rock, for example. Basically, the image tag says the project that we have an image with a source, and then we put the URL of the image. The paper will be and the scissors. Inside the alt tag, we say an alternative text in case the browser can't render the image. So let's say rock, paper, and scissors. Let's try now to see the browser. As you can see, we have 3 huge images right here, which do nothing right now, but we are going to fix it later. I'm finally going to create 2 headings, which I will explain what will they do. So the first heading right here will say and this. Okay, the second heading is blank right now, the first heading basically gives some feedback to our user. It will say what the computer basically chose. The second one will describe the result of the fight. So, as you can see, our game is not playable right now and it's looking kinda bad. But in the next video we're going to create the CSS of the web page and make it look much better. So for now you can play around with text and things like that. You can create your own images, and then we're going to create the CSS of our code. In this part of the project we're going to create the CSS for our game. So our game currently looks like this. It's not very user friendly and it looks bad. Let's get to our style.css file. So in CSS we basically describe the browser how it's going to handle certain elements. For example, we're going to say that the body element is going to have a background color red and a text color of white. When we save this and refresh our page, you will notice that nothing changed because we haven't linked the CSS file to our HTML document. So let's go to the head tag and add another link tag. As you can see, Visual Studio Code generated the tag for us, but you're going to write link. The relationship will be styleset, and the link to the styleset will be style.css. It's a relative path, but you can also use a full path if you want. So if we refresh our page now, you are going to see that it looks worse than before. So let's choose some colors I prepared earlier, which will be, give me a minute to find them. Okay, 5D, 5, 7, 6B, and a text color of let's try to see our web page now. Okay, it looks much better, but we have a lot of things to work on. Let's continue by improving our header tag. So if we go back to the page, the header tag includes these two headers right here. Let's try to change the background color for the header. So let's do header background color and also set a color of So if we refresh our page now, we're going to see that the background color of the whole header tag changed, but it's still bad. So let's do this. I will explain when I finish. If we refresh the page now, you can see it's starting to look better. So what we did right here, this symbol right here symbolizes every HTML element basically. So for every element in our document, we're going to set margin and padding to 0, and we're going to align the text on the center. As you can see here, every text is centered. In case you're not familiar with CSS, margin is basically the distance from the neighbor elements, while padding is the distance from the content of a tag to its borders. So as you can see here, we have our content inside our tag. Padding will be the distance between the content and the border. Then we have our border, and then margin will be the distance from the border to any neighbor objects. You can check CSS box model for more information on this. You can find a lot. So why don't we add a little padding on our header tag? I'm going to add the padding of 15 pixels and see how it looks. Okay, that's much better now. We are also going to add a box shadow. So by coming here on the header tag and adding box shadow rule, let's set it to this color. I have prepared the colors from before, obviously, so don't freak out. Let's see how it looks now. As you can see, our header tag has a solid shadow right here of a darker color. So what we do here is we set the color of the shadow, then the X offset, the Y offset, and the blur, how blurry the shadow is. So if we do it 10 pixels, we're going to see that it fades out, but I prefer the 0 pixel one. It looks more solid. So let's move on and style our table right here, our scoreboard. Okay. Let's create another CSS rule for tables. I'm going to set the background color of our table to be same with this one, the box shadow we have right here, which was this one. And let's also create a border for our table. It will be 5 pixel solid, and the color will be, let's see how it looks. Okay, as you can see, we have a new background color and a new border. In case you are wondering, we can have more styles of border right here, like dust, which will look like this, but I prefer it solid in this project. As you can see right here, our table is basically stuck with our header. So let's move it a little bit to the, let's center it and move it a little bit down. We're going to use margin for this reason. What this does is it moves the whole table 40 pixels down, and it also centers it in the web page. So here it is. It's much better now. Let's also scale up the font a little bit by using the font size property to 80 pixels. As you notice, we have a bigger text right now. So we also need to style the individual table cells. In order to do that, we're going to go back to our HTML file and we're going to set an ID for our first table row. So an ID is a unique way to describe a single HTML tag. So when we get here in the CSS code, we can do this. We can change the style of a single HTML tag by specifying its ID. Let's do background color. Sorry. Like this. As you can see, we only apply a new background color on the first row of our table, because we basically set an ID for this first row. If we did this otherwise, let's say table row, it will also affect the second row, but we don't want that, so we're going to apply the background color on the course name ID. Moving on, let's style our table a little bit more by adding a little padding around our content. Let's say 20 pixels. That's much better. But as you may already noticed, each column in our table has a different width. We don't want that, it looks bad, so we're going to set a fixed width for our table columns. Sorry. Let's say 100 pixels. Okay, that's much better. Let's move on and fix our images a little bit. As you can see right now, they are very large, so we want them to be in a single line, so we're going to scale them down a little bit. We're going to go here and edit all our image tags by specifying the width to be 150 pixels. Okay, that's great. Let's also change the padding a little bit on its image and the margin. Let's say 20 pixels on the x-axis and 40 pixels on the y-axis. Okay, let's also specify padding and the border. We'll do 50 pixels like we do in the header, and we're going to set a border of 5 pixel solid, and let's try the same border with a scoreboard. Okay, it looks good to me, but let's try to enchant it a little bit by basically trimming up the corners right here using the border radius property. Let's set it to 20%. If we refresh our web page, you're going to see that they are not squares anymore. If you want to do a full circle, you can do 50%. But for our project, we're going to use 10%. Just a little smooth corners. Finally, when we hover over our images, so when we move, a hover is basically when you move your pointer above the image. In order to change how an object behaves when you hover over it in CSS, we use this syntax. And I found the color we will use. So we are in the previous colors we used the hex format, while now we are using the RGB format. If we save our web page and hover over our weapons, you can see that when I move the mouse above a weapon, the background color changes. It's a nice effect. Okay, the final thing that we're going to do in this video is to change the font of our web page. We could either use the font family property and use a very popular font like as you can see the font changed, but I'm going to show you a way to download fonts from the Google Web Fonts page. So visit the Google website and select the font that you like. Let's try this one, or maybe this one. Okay, click select this font and customize. We're going to need just the regular and the bold one. Yeah, nothing else. In the Latin format. In order to embed that in our web page, we need to copy this tag in our HTML. So back to Visual Studio Code. Go to the head tag and copy the link. Now, we also need to set the font in our CSS. So, what we say right here is try to use the Poppins font, and if you're not able to do it, use any sans serif font that you have in our system available. So let's see how our page looks now. Let's close that. Okay. We can play around with a font weight now, but we only got to only the regular and the bold one. As you can see, by default, our H1 tags are bolded, while our table is a regular font. So we are basically done with our CSS. You could play around with the colors a little bit, or the borders and stuff like that. And in the next video we're going to move on the application functionality, because if you try to click anything right now, we have no interaction with the user and basically nothing works. It's just a game interface. So using JavaScript, we're going to create a fully working rock, paper, scissors game. So see you there. So far we have created our application interface by first creating the content using the HTML language and then specifying its style using CSS. Our final step would be to make the application work basically, using JavaScript language. By going back to our project in the script.js file, here we're going to write a script basically that handles the user interactions with the game, and that's basically where we're going to do everything for our game. So let's start by creating a few variables in JavaScript. Let's create the user score and the comp score. If you're not familiar with JavaScript, a variable is basically, think of a cell that holds a single value in it. In our case, we have user score, which is 0, and computer score, which is 0 as well. This can change, that's why it's called variable. We can print it, we can do operation with it, and stuff like that. Keep in mind that when we update the score, so if we set it to 1 for example, nothing is going to happen on our web page, because that's just a variable. It has nothing to do with our game right now. We're going to link that later. Let's first go to our HTML web page and connect our JavaScript to the document. For that purpose, we're going to use the script tag. And we're going to specify the source of the JavaScript file, which is .js in our example. So you can either put the script tag at the end of the body tag or at the head tag. The most common one is at the bottom of the body tag. So what's the difference, you may ask yourself? When we put the script at the head tag, it gets loaded in the browser before any other content. So when you put it at the end of the body tag, it gets loaded when the page has already finished loading. That's why we prefer it most of the times in the end of the body tag. We don't want our page to be wide for a few seconds, for example, as the script is loading. We want to load our content and then our script. But of course there are cases that we want our script to run first, so just keep that in mind. Okay, let's go back to our JavaScript file and let's try to change the score of the player to 1, for example. If we do that, it doesn't work obviously, so what we need to do is basically take this element right here and change its content. Every tag in our HTML file can be handled in JavaScript. We can change its value, specify its attributes, we can even delete it or create new ones. So let's add an ID on this score right here. This will be the P score for player and the C score for computer score. So using the getElementById function in JavaScript, we can do this. Let's name it we will do document dot getElementById, and our ID for the user is pscore. We'll do the same for the computer score. Now these variables right here store the tag itself and some info about it. This info includes the content of the HTML, the attributes like the ID, and much more. Let's try to change. Let's set the user score to 2, and let's update our user score field. Let's do user score td dot inner HTML equal to user score. As you can see, the player score is now 2. So let's try to understand a little bit better what happened here. What we did was create two variables which has nothing to do with our document. We also create two variables which store the tag that we have in a document, and we found them using their IDs. So using the getElementById function, we got the tags that we wanted to. Then, using the variable for the user score, we updated the inner.html property and set it equal to our user score. We can set it equal to a lot of things like hello. But in our case, it's going to start with 0, and we're going to update it as the player chooses a weapon and basically fights with a computer. So, what else do we need to do? We also need to get this header right here and the description as well. If you remember from the past videos, we also have created a heading tag in which we will store the outcome of our fight with the computer. So let's take, using the same way, these two elements. We first have to create an ID, of course. Let's do desk for this one and result for this one. Sorry, let's do result. Let's test if that worked out right by changing the inner HTML property to hello world, for example. If we go back to our web page and update, we're going to see hello world right here. So this worked out right. So let's remove this and see what else we are going to need for our project. We are going to need our three buttons, of course, the rock, paper and scissors images. So when the user clicks any of them, we want to handle that click and execute some code as soon as we get the click. So let's load this image as well. This is called caching, by the way. So we basically load the web page on our script and we're going to use it as the user plays with our game. Let's do of course we haven't yet specified IDs for our images, so let's do ID and scissors. Now we can get them using the getElementById function. Let's move on by adding the first features on our game. Let's go and add an event listener. I will explain this when I finish, so don't worry about it. So, what this is? We attach an event listener, which is when an event occurs, our function is executed. Our function currently does nothing, but we are going to do a lot of stuff here later. So we take a rock object, which is this one, and we attach an event listener which handles the click event on our image. So when an event happens, click in our case, this function is executed. Let's try that by doing console log. This is a very useful function where you are debugging something in JavaScript. You can print out things in the console. Let's do user clicked rock. If we go back to our web page and refresh, we're going to hit F12 and open up the console. And we're going to hit rock. As you can see, user clicked rock appears here. But when we click paper or scissors, nothing happens. Let's try that one more time. Okay, user clicked rock. So basically our program currently catches the click event and executes the function that we have here. Let's also attach this. Let's also create this for paper and scissors. I'm going to copy and paste it to save time. Now if we go back to our web page, you can see that our program detects every click of any image, which is very good. So, what we want our program to do as soon as the user clicks an image. Let's say that our user clicks paper. What our program should do next? It should generate a random reply from the computer. So when the user clicks paper, we want our computer to also select a weapon, let's say rock for example. In order to do that, we are going to do it completely random. We are not going to create a clever artificial intelligence here. Let's create a function called generate choice. Which will have no input, and it will return either rock, paper or scissors. So I'm going to show you how we're going to do that in a minute. Okay, let's see that. Okay, so math.random returns a random number from 0 to 1. So let's try to print that for you to see. we are going to call this function when the user clicks rock, for example. Okay, so every time we hit a rock, as you can see right here, a random number is generated. It will never be 0 or 1, it will be something in between, and it's completely random. We can't predict what will that be. So you may ask, why do we need that number? Using that number, we are going to basically produce a rock, paper or scissors response. We will see how we will do that in a minute. Let's first, okay, so suppose that rock is 0, paper is 1, and scissors is 2. So in order to generate a number from 0 to 2 basically, let's try multiplying a random number by 3. This will give us, as you can see, a number from 0 to 2.9999. But that's not enough as well. We need to round it up to the closest integer, like 0, 1 or 2. As soon as we have a 0 and 1 or a 2, we can return the user rock, paper or scissors depending on the number. So for that we are going to use the floor function like this. Let's try now to see how it looks. So if we refresh our page right here and click the rock, you can see that we're getting either a 0 and 1 or a 2, which is great. The results are pretty random, even when we get a lot of 1s right here. That's what random is basically. So let's now create a switch case, and according to the number that we generated, we're going to return a rock, a paper or a scissors. So switch, and according to the number we're going to do case 0, we're going to return R for rock. It will be easier to check the R and the rock. You're going to see later. We're going to return P for rock, paper. I missed the semicolons here. And in case of 2, we're going to return scissors or S. What we will also do is update the description header by saying that computer picked rock, for example, scissors or paper. We're going to copy this and here as well. Okay, so let's try to run our program now. Okay, we are always going to pick a rock. Wait a minute. We need to remove this one. Okay, and as you can see here, computer keeps picking different things, or in that case picks rocks 4 times in a row, so it's completely random, and we're good to continue. This video is getting a little bit long, so we're going to stop now and continue in the next one. In this video we are going to create a function that will handle the computer choices and will decide who is the winner, basically. So let's create a function named play. So what will this function do? As soon as the user selects a weapon, the play function is going to take that user choice and compare it with the computer's choice. Then it will decide the outcome of the matchup, and it will update the scores and the descriptions and the results. Let's go ahead and add an input in our function, which will be choice, and we're going to call it as soon as the user clicks any weapon, basically. So when the user clicks rock, we're going to do play with input R. Let's remove this comment. When the user picks paper, we're going to do play P. And when the user picks scissors, we're going to do play S. So we are also going to need a computer choice. Let's do choice 2. Will be generate choice. Now let's add these variables together in the matchup variable. Let's do choice plus choice 2. Let's print that so that you can see how it looks. Let's refresh the page and click any choice. Oh. So the problem right here is this: we missed the parentheses. Let's refresh again. Okay, as you can see, we get different matchups. Let's click paper. The computer also clicked paper, so the matchup is PP. When we use scissors, for example, the computer again picked paper, so the matchup is SP. If we click rock, for some reason the computer keeps picking paper, but I don't think that's a problem. Okay, so you get the idea. We generate this kind of 2-letter strings that we're going to use to decide who is the winner of a matchup. So inside our play function, let's create another switch case, and according to the matchup, we're going to decide what we're going to do. So in case, let's first group all the win cases, the lose cases and the draw cases. Let's start with the draw cases, which are the easier one. If the matchup is RR, PP or SS, it means to have a draw. So we're going to update the result header to it's a draw. And we're going to do nothing with the user score or the computer score because nobody wins, so the score remains the same. We are also going to break here. I will explain this how it works later. Let's now list the winning matchups, which are if we pick rock and the computer picks scissors, we win. If we pick paper and the computer picks rock, we also win. And if we pick scissors and the computer picks paper, we win. So let's copy this code right here. We have 3 more cases, which are the lose cases basically, which are the complete opposite from these ones. So if we now pick rock and the computer picks paper, we lose. If we pick scissors and the computer picks rock, we lose. And if we pick paper and the computer picks scissors, we also lose. So let's update the results here. Okay, let's go back to our document. Let's say I want to choose scissors. Okay, computer also picked scissors. You can also see the matchup right here. So it's a draw. Let's now do rock. Wow. Computer also picked rock. Let's try paper. Here we go. We picked paper. Computer picked scissors. So we lost the round. As you can see, the score is still the same, but we're going to update it in a minute. Let's try to win a round now. Okay, I'm going to pick a rock until I win. Okay, finally he picked scissors, so we won this round. Let's get back to our code and try to update the score. So if it's a draw, there's nothing to do here. If it's a win, we're going to do user score plus plus. This basically increases the variable right here by 1. Oh, I also forgot to explain the break statements. So if we don't use the break statement here, basically it's going to continue from here and also run this code. So when we say that it's a draw, we want to leave the switch case basically. We're going to go here. So if we don't do that, we're going to do, if it's a draw, it's also going to be a win and a lose, because it will enter this code and this code as well. Let's also update the computer score when the computer wins, and let's try to run now. What do you think will happen? Obviously the score doesn't update yet, because as we said in the start of the previous video, we need to update the HTML tags content. So when we finish with the matchup, let's call a function that we haven't yet created, the update score function. What this function will do is basically, if any of this has changed, so if the user score is different from the contents of the user score row, we're going to update it. So let's declare a function right here. user score. It doesn't need any arguments. Oh, we spelled it right here. It's update score. So we're not going to do an if statement. We are just going to update the HTMLs. So let's try to do this. Okay, so let's refresh our page and run our program again. That's cool. Okay, as you can see, if we lose the round, the computer gets +1 score. If we win, we get +1 ourselves. If it's a draw, the score remains the same. So we call the update score function each time we have a matchup. So, and we have a matchup each time the player chooses a weapon. So when we choose a weapon, the computer also chooses a weapon. We compare the values and we update the score. We could also use this code here, but I suggest that you get the habit of using functions as much as you can, because if we need to call this function in another part of the code, it will be easier to edit, debug, and it's generally more clear to write more functions. Okay, let's see what else we can do. Okay, what we're going to do now is, if the player is currently winning, we're going to change the border color of our table to green, but if the computer is winning, we're going to change it to red. If they are in a draw, we're going to leave it as it is. Let's now create an update color function. So this function is going to compare the user score to the computer score. If the user is winning, we're going to set it to green. If the user is losing, red. Else, we're going to set it to gray. So we're going to use an if else statement. So if the user score is bigger than the computer score, let's also add a comment right here. We're going to do, okay, if we go back to our HTML file, we haven't specified an ID to the table, but we can do another thing. We're going to learn about the new function in JavaScript that returns the tag of an element. So let's do table equals document query selector and table. So how this works is, it works exactly like getElementById, but instead of searching for an element by an ID, it uses the same principles like CSS. So if you want to search for an ID, you use the hashtag and the name. If you want to search for a class, you use the dot and the class name after that. And if you want to search for an element like this, you just do it like we did right here. So This function should return us the table object in this variable. If we get back to our code, let's try to table. We can update the style property, which is its CSS basically. I'm going to go to background or border basically. Equal to, let's go back to our CSS. Okay, so as you can see, our border is 5 pixels solid. We're going to keep it as it is, and we're just going to change the color. So let's do 5 pixels of solid green. I have prepared the green hex value right here, which is okay. So else if if the computer is winning, we're going to do the same, but set the border color to I also forgot some semicolons here. And finally, if we have a draw, so if none of this work, the only case that none of this work is if the user score is equal to the computer score. We're going to set the border of our table to 5 pixels solid, the gray that we used here, this one. Let's get back to our code, to our browser. As you can see, nothing happens yet because we never actually call this function. So whenever we update the score, we can also update the color. We can either do that inside this function or at this point. I'm going to insert it right here. It's much more clear, and because when we finish the matchup, we need to update the score and the color. So let's try that now. Okay, it's draw. Wow. 3 draws in a row. 4 draws. Okay, finally we won the round. As you can see, the border color changed to green. Let's try to let the computer win now. Here we go. And if we manage to go back in a draw, the border also becomes gray. And when we come back from in the score, the border becomes again green. Okay, so as this video is getting a little long, in the next video we are going to also add some interactions to our button, like when the user selects a weapon, we're going to give the user feedback on which weapon he chose. So currently we choose rock, and if we move the mouse away, we don't know which one we choose, only if we deduct from here. But we are going to change the background color of the selected weapon basically. and also set the color for this text according to the result of the fight. So see you in the next video. In this final part of the project, we are going to add a little bit of a few details on our game, like show the user which weapon he selected. We can try add a few animations on the weapons. I mean, once the user selects a weapon, we can, for example, fade in or fade out the background colors and stuff like that. Let's see along the way what we're going to do. Let's start by changing the color of the selected weapon. In order to do that, I'm going to create a new function called button color. This is going to need an input. Let's name element or selected is better, I think. This function is going to update the selected element's background color to this color right here. You can try if another color yourself. I just created a palette before we start this tutorial and I stick to this for the whole project, but you can play around with it. So, when do we want to call this function? As soon as the user clicks a button, we want to call this function with the element that the user clicked. In our case, it's rock. In this case, it's paper and scissors. So, if we go back to our project, you can see that once the user clicks something, the background color changes. However, it never basically turns back to normal. So, if we click all these three, it's like we selected all three of them. So, when we change the background of any color of these three buttons, we also have to reset the background color of the not remove property, we need to specify it. Let's set a blank background for every element. So we're going to reset the background color for each element and then update the background color for the selected element. Let's see how this looks. Okay, that's much better. You can also see our border color depending on the score working. Another thing that we could do in this project is add a little bit of animation. So, as you can see here, when the user hovers over a weapon, the background color instantly changes. This looks a bit unprofessional, so we're going to change that. We're going to go back to our CSS and in our image hover rule, we're going to specify that we're going to do a transition on the background color. So Yeah, it's on the background color of 1000 milliseconds with this. So if we update, okay, it's not working because we forgot to include the time unit here, which is milliseconds. So it should work now. Yeah, as you can see, when we hover over our weapon, background color changes slowly and smoothly. Okay, but we can do a little bit better than that. As you can see, when the user selects a new weapon, the background color of the selected one changes instantly as well. So we're going to go back to our style sheet and copy this property right here. So what we did is, we're not going only to transition the background only when the user hovers over it. Every time we change the background color of our image, we're going to do it, let's do it a little bit quicker, let's say 0.8 seconds with the ease timing. Okay, so if we refresh our page now, you can see that when we select a new weapon, the previous one changes slowly. We can also do that for our table border. Try to do it yourself before you see the solution. We first specify the property that it's being updated, then the duration, and then the animation effect. Okay, so go to the table rule and use the transition property. I'm going to do border 800 milliseconds as well here. Let's see if this works out. That's much better. As you can see, our game starts to look much smoother. I can't seem to win this computer. Yeah, he's too good. Finally, okay. That is much better. So there is one more thing I would like to do with our game. As you were testing your game, probably you may have noticed that each time that we want to reset the score, we have to refresh our page. We don't want to do that. We want to create a button that every time we click it, the score will be resetted. So let's go to our HTML code, and on the bottom of the page below the description and the result, let's create a div with an ID of reset and the content of reset. Let's see how this looks on our page. Okay. Let's style this up a little bit. Let's make sure we got this right. Okay, it's reset. Let's set the width to 100 pixels and the height as well. Let's also specify a background color of, let's take this one. And let's see how it looks. Okay. We might also need to do margin auto. And I have misspelled the background, I think. Yeah. So, if we go back, let's, yeah, the height too much. Let's do 20 pixels, it might be better. Or 35, I think. Okay. Final try on 30 pixels. Okay, that's great. But currently, when we click it, it does nothing. So let's also go to our JavaScript and add another event handler, or let's first load the button. I'm going to do reset equals document, get element by ID, and the ID is reset. So we are going to add an event handler to our button. As you can see here, Visual Studio Code shows us the whole list of events, but we are just going to use the click event and execute this code as soon as the user clicks. We're going to do users call equals 0, computers call equals 0 as well, and we're going to update the color and the score. Let's see how this looks now. Okay, suppose we play a few rounds here. Okay, as you can see, the border color of the table changes, the score changes, but the last user selection still remain. Okay, so if we did reset, the rock is still selected. So let's fix that, and we're ready to go. So we might, okay, let's add if select equals null. Okay. So I'm going to explain in a minute. Let's see if this works first. Oh yeah, I missed an equal sign here, so it was going in every time it reaches here. Wow. Okay, let's try to reset now. As you can see, our animations works and the game completely resets. So before we finish, let's understand what we just did here. So we reset the background colors for all our buttons, and then if the element that we selected is equal to null, null basically means empty or nothing. So when we click the reset button, we want to say our program to reset the selected item. So because it doesn't matter anymore, we start a new game basically. So we pass the argument null, and if the selected is equal to null, we end the function right here and we return nothing. Else we update the background color of the selected button. Let's do one more test of our game to ensure that everything is running smoothly. Wow, we're getting too much throws. Okay, so that's it for this project. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I highly encourage you to go ahead and improve it even more if you have any good ideas on it. Thanks for watching this project, and see ya in a future one. Bye.